Thank you for bringing the motion, Senator Westrom. Members, you will recall it was nearly a year ago now. We were here debating the state and local government finance bill in this body and discussing one thing about this particular provision of the bill, Mr. President, and that was the question of whether or not the people of Minnesota would be able to have their voices heard on an issue as important to them as the meaning and the history of their state as represented in the state seal and the state flag. That was the question before us. The resounding answer from the majority, Mr. President, was no. The people of Minnesota were told no, we are not going to hear your voice on this. Republicans stood up in unison on this and said we want the people of Minnesota to be heard by their elected representatives, and the Democrats, Mr. President, said no. We actually were able to get one Democrat to vote with us on a motion to do that. Just 1 out of 34 voted with Republicans to put an amendment on the bill, and it went to the conference committee. The Democrat majority, Mr. President, in the conference committee said to the people of Minnesota, no, we're not going to hear your voice here. They stripped that provision out of the bill. The omnibus bill came back to this floor without the ability of the people of Minnesota to be heard through their elected representatives. The people of Minnesota were told, no, we don't want to hear from you. That's what they were told. Mr. President, I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the State Emblems Redesign Commission, the commission, Mr. President, that was outlined and called for in the bill to meet. The commission was to meet beginning in August and didn't begin meeting, Mr. President, until September, a month late. And as a matter of fact, they only had 3.5 months to consider this major question, Mr. President, before us that affects the citizens of Minnesota, their understanding and perception of their history and projection of what their history and meaning is going forward into the future in this great state. And 3.5 months, we met weekly, Mr. President, up until the deadline, which was the last day of December, upon which the report was issued. Now, Mr. President, there were members of the commission. 13 members were voting members of the commission. 4 of us were legislators, non-voting members. So, Mr. President, 13 people out of the nearly 6 million people in the state of Minnesota, 13 people chose the design of the flag and seal that is set to go into effect if this legislature does not act, is set to go into effect on May 11th of this year as the next flag and seal of the state of Minnesota. 13 people had their voice heard, but nearly 6 million people, as we're heading down the road now, will not. And Mr. President, during that process, the 3.5-month process, members of the committee, including myself and others, begged the commission to take input from the people of Minnesota. Mr. President, the input that we had in terms of hearing lasted less than an hour and a half. About 15 people in the state were listened to. 2 of those people, actually 2 of the 15 or so people that were heard in that were from the country of England, from the United Kingdom, while nearly 6 million people were not heard from, Mr. President. So again, the people's voice and their ability to be listened to in that process was rejected by this very process. As a matter of fact, we asked for input from the people of Minnesota. Give us your input about the tentative designs that have been put forward. We received like 2,000 pieces of input from the people of Minnesota. The commission, Mr. President, disregarded that input. It was never cataloged. It was never brought forward before the commission. When I and other members brought some of those pieces forward, some ideas, they were soundly rejected by the commission in favor of the direction they were going. the people of Minnesota were not heard in that process, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, before us today, Mr. President, is the opportunity for the people of Minnesota to be heard. They have been clamoring to be heard on this issue that is significant to each and every one of them as it reflects on what they understand to be their history and will project the meaning of the state of Minnesota into the future. And we have the opportunity, members, if we change direction and finally listen to the people, for them to be heard in this process. I encourage members to vote yes on the Westrom amendment or Westrom motion. And Mr. President, I do understand that a roll call has been asked for. Thank you, Mr. President.